Hello everyone, and welcome to another session of Miss Katy reading The Hobbit. So you may be wondering where I am. It looks a little odd. I built myself a little bit of a blanket fort. I know I said that we were kind of going on different adventures every week since Bilbo was going on his, and this week, since we're in the caves where the goblins are, I thought I'd make a little cave for myself, and I brought a little friend just in case the goblins come along. So don't worry, I'm fine. But anyways, I just thought it would be kind of fun. I'm sure that you guys are doing a lot of different things now that you're not in school, and one of them maybe even making a blanket fort. I am terrible at blanket forts. I have like 4 chairs right now propping these all up. So hopefully yours looks better. Maybe when I post this, you guys can post some pictures of what your blanket forts look like. So, as I said last time, we're kind of getting into the sections where it's not just going to be one chapter every time. And this one's probably no exception. This chapter is quite long, so I'm just going to hit 30 minutes of reading, and then we'll kind of pick up where we left off. We may be doing like part of chapter 5 and part of chapter 6 next week. Who knows? But like I said, the last time, this is one of my favorite chapters. This is when a character gets introduced that many of you guys will know, even if you haven't seen the movie of The Hobbit or read the books or anything like that, you're going to know who this character is. And so I really like this one. So if you guys remember, in the last chapter that we read, Bilbo and his company, they fell down into the like secret opening of where the goblins are. And Gandalf rescued them from the goblins, but now they're kind of like, they don't know where they're going. Bilbo just fell into an unknown location. So in this chapter, we're going to find out what happened. So let's dive right in. Chapter 5, Riddles in the Dark. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just as dark as when he had them shut. No one was anywhere near him. Just imagine his fright. He could hear nothing, see nothing, and could feel nothing except for the stone of the floor. Very slowly, he got up and groped about on all fours until he touched the wall of the tunnel. But neither up nor down he could find anything, nothing at all. No sign of goblins, no sign of dwarves. His head was swimming, and he was far from certain even of the direction that they had all been going when he had his fall. He guessed it as well as he could, and crawled along a good way, till suddenly his hand met what felt like a tiny ring of cold metal lying on the floor of the tunnel. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. It's a turning point kind of for the whole story, if you guys get my meaning. He did not put the ring in his pocket. He put the ring in his pocket almost without thinking. Certainly it did not seem of much particular use at the moment. He did not go much further, but sat down on the cold floor and gave himself up to complete miserableness for a long while. He thought of himself frying bacon in his own kitchen at home, for he could feel inside that it was high time for some other meal, but that only made him more miserable. He could not think of what to do, nor could he think what had happened, or why he had been left behind, or why his head had been so sore, and why the goblins had not caught him. The truth was, he had been lying quiet, out of sight, out of mind, in this dark corner for a very long time. After some time, he felt for his pipe. It was not broken, and that was something. Then he felt for his pouch. There was some tobacco in it, and that was something more. And then he felt for matches, and he could not find any at all, and that shattered his hopes completely. Just as well for him, as he agreed when he came to his senses. Goodness knows what the striking of the matches and the smell of the tobacco would have brought him in the dark holes of this horrible place. Still, at the moment, he was feeling very crushed. But in slapping all of his pockets and feeling all around for matches, his hand came on the hilt of his little sword, the little dagger he had gotten from the trolls that he had quite forgotten, nor fortunately had the goblins noticed, as he wore it inside his breeches, which are pants. Now he drew it out. It shone pale and dim before his eyes. It's an elvish blade, too, he thought, and goblins are not very near, and yet not far enough. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars, which so many songs had been sung for. He had also noticed that such weapons made great impressions on the goblins that came about them so suddenly. Go back, he thought? No good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward? Only thing to do. On we go. So up he got, and trotted along with his little sword held in front of him, and one hand feeling the wall, and his heart all pitter-a-patter. Now Bilbo was not in what was called a tight space, but you must remember that it was not quite so tight for him as it would have been for me and you. Hobbits are not quite like ordinary people, and after all, if their holes are nice and cheery places and properly aired, quite different from the tunnels of goblins, still they are more used to tunneling than we are, and they do not easily lose their sense of direction underground. Not when their heads have recovered from being bumped, that is. Also, they can move very quickly and very quietly, hide easily, and recover wondrously from falls and bruises. And they have a fund of wisdom and wise sayings that men have mostly never heard of or have forgotten long ago. I should not have liked to have been in Mr. Baggins's place. All the same. The tunnel seemed to have no end, and all he knew was that he was still going down pretty steadily and keeping in the same direction in spite of a twist and a turn or two now. There were passages leading off to the side every now and then, and he knew by the glimmer of his sword that he could feel with his hands on the wall. Of these he took no notice, except to hurry past for fear of goblins. And there he went, on, down and down, and he still heard no sound except the occasional whirl of a bat by his ears, which startled him at first, till it became too frequent to bother about. I do not know how long he kept going on like this, hating to go on, not daring to stop, on and on, until he was tireder than tired. It seemed like all the way tomorrow and over into the days beyond. Then suddenly, without warning, he trotted into water. Splash! Ugh! It was icy cold. That pulled him up sharp and short. He did not know whether it was just a pool in the path, or the edge of an underground stream that had crossed the passage, or the brink of a deep, dark, subterranean lake. The sword was hardly shining at all now. He stopped and could hear, and when he listened hard, drops drip, drip, dripping from an unseen roof in the water below. But there seemed to be no other sound. So it is a pool or a lake and not an underground river, he thought. Still, he dare not wade out into the darkness. He could not swim, or he thought, too, of nasty, slimy things with big, bulging, blind eyes wriggling in the water. There are strange things living in the pools and the lakes in the heart of the mountains. Fish whose fathers swam in, goodness knows how many years ago, and never swam out again, with their eyes growing bigger and bigger and bigger from trying to see in the blackness. There are also other things more slimy than fish. Even in the tunnels and the caves the goblins had made for themselves, there are other things living unbeknownst to them, who have sneaked in from the outside to lie in the dark. Some of these caves, too, go back to their beginnings, to ages before the goblins, who only widened them and joined them in the passages. The original owners are still there in odd corners, slinking and nosing about. Down here in the dark waters lived old Gollum, a small, slimy creature. I know you guys recognize him. He's kind of a creepy-looking guy. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes on his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed around quite quietly on the lake, for a lake it was, wide and deep and dangerously cold. He paddled it with his large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make. Not he. He was looking out his pale lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with long fingers, as quick as thinking. He liked meat, too. Goblin he thought good, when he could get it, but he took care that they never found him. He just throttled them from behind, if they ever came down alone anywhere near the edge of the water when he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there, down in the very roots of the mountain. They had come upon the lake, and they were tunneling down long ago, and they found they could go no further. So their road ended in that direction, and there was no reason to go that way, unless the great goblin sent them. Sometimes he took fancy fish from the lake, and sometimes neither goblin nor fish came back. Actually, Gollum lived on a slimy island of rock in the middle of the lake. He was watching Bilbo now from the distance with his pale eyes like telescopes. Bilbo could not see him, but he was wondering a lot about Bilbo, for he could see that it was no goblin at all. Gollum got into his boat and shot off from the island. while Bilbo was sitting on the brink altogether flummoxed about the end of his way and his wits. Suddenly up came Gollum and whispered, "Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast, and at least a tasty morsel it'll make us, Gollum." And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. That's how he got his name. Though he always called himself my precious. The Hobbit nearly jumped out of his skin when the hiss came through his ears, and he suddenly saw the pale eyes sticking out at him. "Who are you?" he said, thrusting the dagger in front of him. "What is he, my precious?" whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself, even though he never had anyone to speak to. This is what he had come to find, for he was not really very hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise, he would have grabbed first and asked questions later. "I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins. I have lost the dwarves, I have lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know if I can get away. Only if I can get away." "What has it got in his hands?" said Gollum, looking at the sword, which he did not quite like. "A sword, a blade which came out of Gondolin." Gollum said, and became quite polite. "Perhaps we sit here and chats with it a bit, my precious. I like riddles, perhaps. It does. He was anxious to appear friendly, at any rate, for the moment, until he found out more about the sword and the Hobbit, whether he was really alone, and whether he was good to eat, and whether Gollum was really hungry. Riddles were all he could think about. Asking them, and sometimes guessing them, had been the only game he had ever played with the other funny creatures sitting in their holes long, long ago, before he lost all of his friends and was driven away, alone, crept down into the dark under the mountain. "Very well," said Bilbo, who was anxious to agree, until he found more about the creature, whether he was alone, whether he was fierce, or whether he was hungry, and whether or not he was a friend to goblins. "You ask first," he said, because he could not have the time to think of a riddle. So Gollum hissed, "What has roots, as nobody sees, is taller up than trees, up it goes, and yet it never grows." Now, I didn't really get you guys prepared, but Gollum and Bilbo are going to ask a whole bunch of riddles back and forth to each other. So try to see if you guys can guess them before Gollum or Bilbo answer. So I'll read this one more time. "What has roots, as nobody sees, is taller up than trees. Up it goes, and yet it never grows." "Easy," said Bilbo. "Mountains, I suppose." Did you get it? "It does guess easy. It must have a competition with us, my precious. If precious asks, and it doesn't answer, we eats it, my precious. If I asks us and we don't answer, then we does what it wants, eh? We shows it the way out, yes?" "All right," said Bilbo, not daring to disagree, and nearly bursting at his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. All right, here's number 2. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, and then they stamp, and then they stand still." That was all he could think to ask. The idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was rather an old one, too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do. "Chestnuts, chestnuts," he hissed. "Teeth, my precious, but we only have 6. Then Gollum asked his second. "Voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bites, and mouthless mutters." "Half a moment," cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. Fortunately, he had once heard something rather like this, and getting his wits back, he thought of the answer. Wind, of course," he said, and he was so pleased that he made one up on the spot. "This'll puzzle this little nasty underground creature for sure," he thought. An eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. "That eye is like to this eye," said the first eye, "but in low place, not in high place." Said Gollum. He had been underground a long time and was forgetting this sort of thing. But just as Bilbo was beginning to hope that the wretch would not be able to answer, Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages and ages before, when he lived with his grandfather in a hole in the bank of a river. "My precious," he said. "Sun on the daisies, it means. It does." But these ordinary above-ground, everyday sort of riddles were tiring him. Also, they reminded him of days when he had been less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him out of temper. What more, it made him hungry. So this time he tried something more difficult and more unpleasant. It cannot be seen. It cannot be felt. Cannot be heard. Cannot be smelt. It lies behind the stars and under the hills, and in empty holes it fills. It comes first and it follows after. Ends life, kills laughter. Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard this sort of thing before, and the answer was all around him anywhere. Dark, he said, without even scratching his head or putting on his thinking cap. A box without hinges, a key or a lid, yet golden treasure inside it's hid. He asked to gain time, until he could think of a really hard one. This he thought a dreadfully easy chestnut, though he had not asked it in the usual way. But it proved a nastier poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself and still did not answer. He whispered and sputtered. After some time, Bilbo became impatient. Well, what is it? He answered. The answer's not a kettle boiling over, as you seem to think with that noise you're making. Give us a chance. Let us give us a chance, my precious. Well, said Bilbo after giving him a long chance, what about your guess? Suddenly Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago under the riverbanks, teaching his grandmother to suck. Eggsies! He hissed. Eggsies it is! And then he asked, alive, without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in male, never clinking. He also in his turn thought this was dreadfully easy, because he had always been thinking about the answer. But he could not remember anything better at the moment. He was so flustered by the egg question. All the same, it was a poser for poor Bilbo, who had never had anything to do with the water if he could help it. I imagine that you know the answer, of course, or can guess it as easily as winking, since you are sitting comfortably at home and have not had the danger of being eaten to disturb your thinking. Bilbo sat and cleared his throat once or twice, but no answer came. After a while, Gollum began to hiss with pleasure in himself. Isn't it nice, my precious? Is it juicy? Is it scrumptiously crunchable? He began to peer into Bilbo out of the darkness. Half a moment, said the Hobbit, shivering. I gave you a good long moment a minute ago. It must make haste, said Gollum, beginning to climb out of his boat onto the shore to get at Bilbo. But when he put on a long webby foot in the water, a fish jumped out in a fright and fell on Bilbo's toes. Ugh, he said, it is cold and clammy, and so he gasped. Fish, he cried, it's a fish. Gollum was dreadfully disappointed. But Bilbo asked another riddle as quick as he ever could, so that Gollum had to get back to his boat and think. No legs lay on one leg. 2 legs sat near on 3 legs. 4 legs got some. It was not really the right time for this riddle, but Bilbo was in a hurry. Gollum might have had some trouble guessing if he had not asked it another time. As it was, after talking of fish, no legs was not so difficult, and after that the rest was easy. Fish on a little table, man sitting on a stool, and a cat sitting on bone. And the cat have the bones. That, of course, is the answer, and Gollum soon gave to it. Then he thought the time had come to ask something hard and horrible. This is what he said. This thing all things devours. Birds, beasts, trees, and flowers. Gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones to meal. Slays kings and ruins towns, and beats the high mountains down. Poor Bilbo sat in the dark, thinking of all the horrible names of all the horrible giants and ogres that he had ever heard about in tales, but not one of them had done all these things. He had a feeling that the answer was quite different and that he ought to have known it, but he couldn't think of it. He began to get frightened, and that was bad for thinking. Gollum began to get out of his boat. He flapped in the water and paddled towards the bank. Bilbo could see his eyes coming towards him. His tongue seemed to stick out of his mouth, and he wanted to shout, give me more time, give me more time. But all that came out with a sudden squeak was, time, time. Bilbo was saved by pure luck, for that, of course, was the answer. Gollum was disappointed once more, and now he was getting angry and was also tired of this game. It had made him very hungry indeed. This time he did not go back to his boat. He sat down in the dark by Bilbo. This made the hobbit dreadfully uncomfortable and scattered his wits. I just have to ask us a question, my precious. Yes. Just one more to guess, I think. Yes, said Gollum. But Bilbo simply could not think any more questions with that nasty, wet, cold thing sitting next to him, pawing and poking at him. He scratched himself and pinched himself, and he could not think of anything. Ask us, said Gollum. Bilbo pinched himself and slapped himself and gripped his little sword. He even felt in his pocket with his other hand. There he found the ring, and he had picked it up that he had picked up in the passage and had forgotten about. What have I got in my pocket? He asked aloud. He was talking to himself, but Gollum thought it was a riddle, and he was frightfully upset. That's not fair, he hissed. It isn't fair, my precious. It is to ask us what it has in its nasty little pockets. Bilbo, seeing what had happened and having nothing better to ask, stuck to his question. What have I got in my pocket? Hissed Gollum. It must give us 3 guesses, my precious. 3 guesses. Very well, guess away, said Bilbo. Handses, said Gollum. Wrong, said Bilbo, who had luckily just taken his hand out again. Guess again, said Gollum, more upset than ever. He thought of all the things that he kept in his own pockets. Fish bones, goblin teeth, wet shells, a bit of nasty bat wing, a sharp stone to sharpen his fangs on, and other things. He tried to think of what other things people keep in their pockets. A knife, he asked at last. Wrong, said Bilbo, who had lost his some time ago. Last guess. Now Gollum was in a much worse state than when Bilbo had asked him the egg question. He hissed and he sputtered and rocked himself back and forth and slapped his feet on the floor and wriggled and squirmed. But he did not dare ask and waste his last guess. Come on, said Bilbo, I'm waiting. He tried to sound bold and cheerful, but he did not feel at all sure about how the game was going to end, whether Gollum would guess right or not. Time's up, he said. String or nothing, shrieked Gollum, which was not quite fair, working in 2 guesses at once. Both wrong, cried Bilbo, very much relieved, and he jumped to his feet, put his back to the nearest wall, and held out his little sword. He knew, of course, that the riddle game was sacred and of immense antiquity, and even wicked creatures were afraid to cheat when they played at it, but he felt like he could not trust the slimy thing to keep any promises in a pinch. Any excuse would do him to slide out of it. And after that, the last question had not been a genuine riddle according to the ancient laws. At any rate, Gollum did not at once attack him. He could see the sword in Bilbo's hand. He sat still, shivering and whispering, and at last Bilbo could wait no longer. Well, he said, what about your promise? I want to go. You must show me the way. Did we say so, precious? Show the nasty little Bagginses the way out. Yes, but what has it got in its pockets, eh? Not string, precious, but not nothing. Oh, no, Gollum. Never you mind, said Bilbo. A promise is a promise. Cross it is, impatient, precious, hissed Gollum. But it must wait. Yes, it must. We can't go up the tunnel so hasty. We must go and get some things first. Yes, to help us. Well, hurry up, said Bilbo, relieved to think of Gollum going away. He thought he was just making an excuse and did not mean to come back. What was Gollum talking about? What useful thing could he keep out in the dark lake? But he was wrong. Gollum meant to come back. He was angry now and hungry, and he was a miserable, wicked creature, and he had a plan. Not far away was his island, of which Bilbo knew nothing, and there in his hiding place he kept a few wretched oddments, and one very beautiful thing, very beautiful, very wonderful. He had a ring, a golden ring, a precious ring. My birthday present, he whispered to himself. That's what he often did in the long, endless, dark days. That's what we wants now. Yes, that's what we wants. He wanted it because it was a ring of power. And if you slipped that ring on your finger, you were invisible. Only in the full sunlight could you be seen, and then only then by your shadow. That would be shaky and faint. My birthday present. It came to me on my birthday, my precious. he had always said to himself. But who knows how Gollum came by presents ages ago in the old days, when such rings were still at large in the world? Perhaps even the master who ruled them could not have said. Gollum used to wear it at first, till it tired him, and now he kept it in a pouch next to his skin, and it galled him. And now he usually hid it in the hole in the rock in his island, and was always going back to look at it. And still sometimes he put it on, when he could not bear to be parted from it any longer, or if he was very, very hungry and tired of fish. Then he would creep along the dark passages looking for stray goblins. He might even venture into the places where the torches were lit, and made his eyes blink and smart, for he knew it would be safe. Oh, yes, quite safe. No one would see him. No one would notice him. Only a few hours ago he had worn it, and it caught a small goblin imp. Oh, how it squeaked! And he still had a bone or two left to gnaw on, but he wanted something softer. Quite safe, yes, he whispered to himself. It won't see us, will it, my precious? No, it won't see us, and its little nastiest sword will be useless, won't it? That is what was in his little wicked mind as he slipped suddenly from Bilbo's side and flapped back to his boat and went off to the dark. Bilbo thought he had heard the last of him, but still he waited, for he had no idea how to find his way out alone. Suddenly he heard a screech. It sent a shiver down his back. Gollum was cursing and wailing in the gloom, not very far off by the sound of it. He was on his island, scrambling here and there, searching in vain. Where is it? Where is it? Bilbo heard him crying. Lost it is, my precious! Lost, lost! Curse and crush us, my precious is lost! What's the matter? Bilbo called. Have you lost? What have you lost? It mustn't ask us, screeched Gollum. None of its business. No, Gollum, it's lost. Gollum, Gollum, Gollum. Well, so am I, cried Bilbo, and I want to get unlost. I won the game and you promised, so come along. Come get me out, and then you can go on with your looking. Utterly miserable as Gollum sounded, Bilbo could not find much pity in his heart, and he had a feeling that anything Gollum wanted, it could hardly be precious, and it could hardly be good. Come along, he shouted. Not yet, precious, not yet, said Gollum, answering. We must search for it. Lost, it's lost, Gollum. But you never guessed my last question, and you promised, said Bilbo. Never guessed, said Gollum, and then suddenly out of the gloom came a sharp hiss. What has it got in its pocket, says? Tell us that. It must tell us that first. As far as Bilbo knew, there was no particular reason why he should not tell him. Gollum's mind had just jumped to guess quicker than this. Naturally, for Gollum had brooded for ages on this one thing, and he was always afraid of it being stolen. But Bilbo was annoyed at the delay. After all, he had won the game pretty fairly, at a horrible risk. Answers were to be guessed, not given, he said. But it wasn't a fair question, said Gollum. Not a riddle, precious, no. Oh well, then if it's a matter of ordinary questions, Bilbo replied, then I asked one first. What have you lost? Tell me that. What has it got in its pockets, is? The sound came hissing louder and louder as he looked towards it, To his alarm, Bilbo now saw 2 points of light peering at him. As suspicion grew in Gollum's mind, the light of his eyes burned with a pale flame. What have you lost? Bilbo asked persistently. But now the light in Gollum's eyes had become a green fire, and it was coming swiftly nearer. Gollum was in his boat again, paddling wildly to the dark shore, and in such a rage of lust and suspicion was in his heart that no sword had any terror for him. Bilbo could not guess what maddened the wretched creature, but all he saw was up, and that was Gollum meant to murder him at any rate. Just in time he turned and ran blindly back up the dark passage down where he had come from, keeping close to the wall, feeling in his left hands. What has it got in its pockets, says? He heard the hiss loud behind him and the splash as Gollum leapt from the boat. What have I wonder, he said to himself, as he panted and stumbled along. But he put his left hand in his pocket. The ring felt very cold as it quietly slipped onto his groping forefinger. The hiss was close behind him. He turned now and saw Gollum's eyes like small green lamps coming up the slope. Terrified, he tried to run faster, but suddenly he struck his toes on a snag on the floor and fell flat with his little sword under him. In a moment, Gollum was on him, but before Bilbo could do anything, recover his breath, pick himself up, or wave his sword, Gollum passed on by, taking no notice of him, cursing and whispering as he ran. What could it mean? Gollum could see in the dark. Bilbo could see the light in his eyes, palely shining from behind. Painfully he got up and sheathed his sword, which now was growing faintly again, and very cautiously he followed. There seemed to be nothing else to do. It was no good crawling back down into Gollum's water. Perhaps if he followed him, Gollum might lead him the way of escape without meaning to. Curse it, curse it, curse it, hissed Gollum. Curse the Bagginses. It's gone. What has it got in its pockets? Oh, we guess, my precious. He found it. He must have found it. My birthday present. All right. We're kind of in the middle of things, but I'm going to stop it there just because, as you can guess, Hobbit found the ring. His precious, Gollum's precious. If any of you guys have seen Lord of the Rings or read Lord of the Rings, I mean, you guys kind of know Gollum's got his ring, the Ring of Power. So we're kind of at a point where you find out how Gollum got the ring and how Bilbo got the ring. So that's kind of exciting. But we've hit 30 minutes and we still have a little bit more in this chapter to go, but I'm going to stop right there just because, I don't want to bore you guys with keep going. So the next time that we read, I will read the second part of chapter 5, and then I will probably start part of chapter 6, just because, like I said, a lot of these chapters are getting kind of long, and I don't want to go over the half an hour mark, just because that's a pretty good time for me to escape to my little fort and make some videos. So I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. I will see you all again soon. Bye.